Welcome again now to the 18th presentation in our series, Grappling with Complexity. So looking back over our presentation so far, we've covered a very wide spectrum of ideas, often from a kind of broad bird's eye perspective. And I'm pleased now to kind of introduce Gary Koekemoer and Vulindlela Nyoni, who are going to take complexity thinking to the local level, very local and very practical level. They'll be engaging in a kind of a conversational way about the complexities of levering change in what Gary calls a broken metro. And by that, we mean our metro, which houses the city of Gqeberha. And that is the place in which we stand as hosts of this seminar. So Gary speaks in this context wearing a hat, or wearing one of his hats, and that is Secretary General of a new political party called AIM that faces its first municipal election quite soon. Vulindlela speaks in this context, also a person with multiple hats, but in this context as a person displaced to this place in a way. And he therefore has a deep interest in the meaning of citizenship. So Gary will offer kind of a brief presentation to kick us off. Vulindlela will join in the conversation later on, and then we'll invite you to join into this conversation as it goes along. Perhaps what we'll do is just ask you to indicate in the chat that you'd like to raise a question, and then we will take it from there. So without any further ado, welcome Gary, welcome Vulindlela, and yeah, over to you. I'm going to disappear myself and looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. And thanks, Willie, for joining me today and keeping me honest. You know, you got to keep politicians honest, you know, especially aspiring ones. So yeah, I mean, so just as context, and I'm going to share the screen soon, really what it is that I've been an activist for most of my life, and an activist for change, mainly around peace activism and environmental activism. And I came to a point where I concluded that to make real change happen in the place that I live, that we had to make some changes in the decision-making process, and that I couldn't do that sitting on the sidelines. And we've tried a whole bunch of stuff. That actually one of the key decision makers in the process is the city itself, or the metro itself. And that it is in a state of brokenness, and that has changed. And so what we're going to try and do today is I'm just going to flight a couple of slides just to give an overview of the city itself, and then just also to the party that I represent in terms of how we're approaching it, because we're trying to really try and approach it from a complexity perspective, in the sense that we want to do two things. One is change the level of debate in the city, so the level of dialogue in the city, and the other one is to change the decision, well, the decision making. And so there's a plan that we have around some of the things. So obviously I speak from a biased perspective. I am Secretary General of this party. I have an interest. We have just over 40 days to go to the local government election. It's a bit of a mess at the moment because of COVID and a whole bunch of other things. There's potentially a decision today that will impact our success going forward. So there's a whole lot of intervening things and threads to this thing. And Willie's just going to try and help me unpack some of those threads and keep me honest in this process. So thank you. So I'm just going to go and just share this quickly. There we go. So I've entitled the talk "Aiming for Change" and the complexity challenge of unbreaking a metro. And when I talk about a metro, I talk specifically about Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, which incorporates the three areas of Gqeberha, Dispatch, and Gqeberha, but also a substantial amount of semi-rural or semi-urban areas. And so it's, yeah, so the name of the movement that I represent is Abantu Integrity Movement, or abbreviated to AIM. And we have this rising sun as an emblem, and the color is specific to this region in terms of the coral trees that are here and the aloes. So we've tried to keep it kind of simple, but we'll take you through that. So I wanted to just talk a bit about the baseline firstly. Obviously, we live in a social media world where there's a lot of information out there and there's a lot of competition for that information. 50% of our nation is born after, sorry, let's just get this out the way, after 1994, and 23% aged 13 or less. So in effect, 50 to 75% of South Africa's population were not alive or didn't live apartheid in terms of experience. So they are reliant on us for that experience. But 50% and more of our, it depends on how you measure it, live below the poverty lines, and people have started referring to this as apartheid 2.0, or the continuation of apartheid, just in a different form. So that's the backdrop, and our city particularly reflects that. You'll see that there's a number of areas in our city where youth unemployment is over 50%, so closer to 60%. And for us, that's a real crisis, because you have young people at home who have no means of income and are finding other ways of income. Okay, so that's the baseline. Then, and social media, I just threw in the social media thing there just to indicate just the use of social media and where that is focused, and it's focused really on the 18 to 34-year-olds that are using it extensively. So this is our city. That's the map of our water crisis. We're not going to face the same water crisis as Cape Town in terms of a day zero, but because of the complexity of our piping system, we are reliant on two main sources of water. One is dams from the sort of southwest area, which lie close to very close to Humansdorp and Potensi, that area. And then water from the Gqeberha Dam, Gqeberha Dam, sorry, that comes via a canal to the, to Cradock, that area, and then is piped to us. And so different parts of the cities receive their water from different places. You'll see the very dark area, red area, is KwaNobuhle, and that's likely the area to run out of water first. And that's probably the most poorest of our communities in the city. But the lighter red is then the suburbs area with some extent, and that. But so we will run out of water, and parts of the city and other parts of the city will have water if it continues on the way that we've had some good rains. But the dams are not filling to the extent that we need them to. Okay, so that's a baseline. Just to add that 40% of our water usage is loss due to leakage in our system. So before it gets to the residence tap, so there's 40%. We lose 40% of our water because of that. Okay, this is just the 2011 map. Census map of our bay, and this reflects in terms of race, where people live in terms of race, and you'll see that in terms, there's an international standard in terms of segregation, but Nelson Mandela Bay is the most segregated metro of the 8 metros in South Africa, and is one of the most segregated across the world. And the pink, for obvious reasons, is the white, is where white people live. The sort of orange, yellow is where colored people, so-called colored people, live. The green is where Indian, Asian people live, and black people are dominated by the blue color. And what you will see is that in the traditional sort of township areas, so to the north, and I don't know if you can see this on the screen, these township areas are primarily black people. These areas, which we call the northern areas, are primarily colored persons, Indian people live in a very sort of smallest zone in Malabar. And then over here in the southern section, you have a very mottled look now. It's predominantly white, but there is a lot of black and colored people. And in effect, what you're seeing is a change in the segregation. So we're moving out of the sort of apartheid race-based segregation into a mix of class and race-based segregation in our city. So the middle class people that used to be bound to townships because they couldn't due to apartheid have now moved out of those townships and have moved into the suburbs to some extent. And so that creates a very interesting, it is the perpetuation of structures that were implemented during apartheid and that have now taken another form. And what you'll see is that map is very closely reflected in our political choices. Generally, the townships vote ANC, and generally the suburbs vote DA. And then the northern areas is split between the ANC and the DA. So these are the results from the last local government election. The DA came in with 57 seats and the ANC with 50 seats. And the important number to remember is 61. That's what gives a party a majority, is 61 seats in the council, and that allows them then to choose the mayor, approve budgets, do a whole bunch of things. So without the 61 seats, you then have to enter a coalition in order to get decisions made in council. That's effectively how it's worked at the moment. Just to give you an oversight, we have a population around about 1.2 million. 800,000 of those people are eligible to vote, so they're over the age of 18. Registered voters are, from the last 29 election, was around about 600,000 people registered to vote, but only 400,000 actually turned up. It's slightly less than 400,000, but I've rounded up. So there's 400,000 people that are eligible to vote in the metro that don't vote. And there's a number of reasons for that, which we can go into detail. And then just generally, you vote on the basis of wards, and wards are generally around about 10,000 voters, registered voters. So that just gives you a backdrop. What I want to now just take you through is why I call it a broken metro. And to a large extent, those of us that live in the suburbs don't see these pictures, but these are pictures that I've taken personally in the various township areas and other suburbs across the city in the last 2-3 months. So these are not dated; these are recent. And what you see here is sewage, raw sewage in our streets. So there's a house in KwaNobuhle, for instance, where it flows through the property, and you'll see here there's a sports ground down here. There's a little one here where it runs into the valley where the cows and sheep feed off the litter and the sewage. So it really is a threat to the entire metro. Then there's this. The municipality talks about a war on waste, but in effect that war is lost. We have waste piled high on sidewalks and open areas across the metro. So effectively we've set up a system whereby there will be an area in a community where people go and dump, and the municipality comes and collects, and then you set up the cycle. So our rubbish collection is not hasn't stopped operating, but it's not dealing with the huge amount. And then there's basic infrastructure needs. So this is taken in Bethelsdorp. These photos, these are dirt roads that exist in our metro where people live. And just a couple of blocks away are roads that are tarred roads, existing tarred roads that are in fairly good condition that are being resurfaced. And that doesn't make sense, unless you look at it through a political lens, in that the resurfaced roads are in certain wards and are there to potentially garner votes through the process. Then I don't know how many of you know, but we have something over 70 sporting and park facilities across the metro that are either locked or lie vandalized. In picture are the St. George's swimming pool, where you can see those two tanks floating. There's the Dan Gqeberha Stadium, and Dan Gqeberha, my apologies, is an iconic sports personality in Gqeberha. There's Adcock Stadium, which is also iconic, and all of them are lying in ruin at the moment. Yeah, I mean, there are a number of reasons for that, but the municipality has said that they don't have the money to fix. So you have these community assets there. Then we call it the Council of Chaos. You've had I think there's been 5 mayoral changes in a 5-year period, and it's as the coalitions have shifted and changed. So what has effectively happened is that the DA came in first because it went into coalition with the UDM and 2 others. The UDM then left that coalition because of a conflict between Trollope and Babani, and then unseated Trollope as the mayor as a result, and Babani then came in as the new mayor. And then you'll know the glass jug incident with the one councillor, Andile Lungisa, who had went to jail for a very brief period as a consequence, and whose disciplinary now, internal disciplinary with the ANC has fallen through because they couldn't constitute the disciplinary committee properly. So the problem with this to and fro is that the normal work of council in terms of approving budgets and keeping the administration accountable can't take place because there's this continuous jockeying for power and all these backstreet deals. Now, and the other problem is that parties like the Patriotic Alliance that garnered 2,000 votes in the last election and allowed them 1 seat, then become kingmakers in the process because they give the magic 61 number to the DA, and so they have a disproportionate impact on the council affairs. So on 1st of November, people will go back to the polls, and they will be given 2 ballots. One is for a ward in which they will be shown a councillor name, prospective councillor name from all of the parties contesting. And then there's also a proportional vote. And the key thing to understand is that the ward vote also counts towards the proportional. And proportional works in a certain way, and I'll just show you the dynamics of how that works. But what it does mean is, so for instance, we're running our campaign on Kuster Jack, who's a well-known political character here, who leads our party, and we're saying that make him mayor. But in effect, the system won't make him mayor unless we get enough seats, unless we get the 61 seat majority in council, and council then elects him as the mayor. But individual citizens or residents don't actually vote for the mayor. They vote for a councillor and they vote for a party. And so that's some of the difficulty in the system as it's set up. Just to give you an understanding, that these are the kind of wards that we break it up into. You'll see that there's some very, very large wards because that's where 10,000 people live, or 10,000 voters live. And then there's some very small wards where the population density is very high. So you'll see that, so we have in total across the city 60 wards, and you have a councillor for each ward, and then you also have 60 PR councillors, which gives you 120 seats. And what has happened in our city in the last election is that the DA took 23 wards and the ANC 36. Now, generally, as I said, the DA represents the suburbs. So those 23 are suburbs or a bit of the northern areas. And the ANC takes 36 wards. And the EFF took 1 ward because the ANC couldn't agree on a candidate for that ward. And then in terms of PR, the PR then is reversed. The DA takes 34 seats from PR, proportional representation, and the ANC takes 14, and it's because the DA is able to get more people to the polls than what the ANC is. The EFF took 5 seats in that process. The UDM took 2, and then you have 5 parties that each got 1 seat. And so those 5 parties are the kingmakers, and with the UDM in the process, because neither the ANC nor the DA can govern, because they, as you can see, they have 57 and 50 seats. So the ANC is 11 short of the magic 61 number, and the DA at this point in time is fall short of the magic number. So it's easier for the DA to form a coalition because they only have to get 4 other seats in that process. But what it does mean is that the city is split between, in effect, the townships and the suburbs. And you will have this continual contestation if that situation continues. The DA's campaign currently is to get you'll have seen their posters that say 50% plus 1. So they want to the 61 seats so that they have a majority, which means that they can then implement their policy program on that basis. The problem with that is that they represent the suburbs. And so the township activists and politicians will then continuously white ant or try and undermine until they're back into power again. And so you'll have this continual play. So one of the reasons that we've started AIM is that we want to break that binary. And we don't expect to get a majority number of seats, but we are hoping for a large number of seats that allow us to be the bridge between the two. And so that we can, firstly, our first hope would be a coalition with the DA and the ANC, but it's unlikely that either of those parties will want to work with each other. I mean, if, the city would solve its problems if those 2 parties came together and said, okay, let's govern together. But they can't. Their differences are just too large. The interests are too great behind them. So what we're hoping to do is be that bridge in the process. And so from a complexity point of view, we've looked at 3 levers. The first is that we've looked at finding people that have an experience in working in communities, that have credibility in communities, that communities have tested and know, and that kind of stuff. So Kuster and others, myself, others, people, we're known entities, and we've been working in the city or the metro over many years. And we've then gone to each ward and trying to find similar people in that process. So people is the one key lever. The other one is principle. And we basically root our principles in that of the Constitution. So fairness, transparency, non-racialism, non-sexism. From an environmental perspective, we believe in collective stewardship combined with sustainable development, so not just sustainable development on its own. And then we're saying principle before power, and a very clear separation of powers between the council and the municipality, that there has to be this separation. And finally, so a couple of other things. And then what we've been very careful to do is put together a plan that we think is, and it's based on the plans that have been done by the World Bank and other parties for the Metro over the years, but simply never implemented because the process was broken. And so we've reduced it to a 10-point plan that tries to cover key things. We start with a vision, but we have a whole host of specific proposals under that. This is just a headline view of that. So there's 3 key levers that we try, that we think will work for us. One is people, one is principle, and one is plan. And then we've structured ourselves just on this basis. And I won't go into that very in much detail, but to say the problem for us has been, obviously the first thing is that we're all volunteers. So other priorities interfere. Funding has been a key issue for us. We primarily are self-funded through founders adding in money. And then the campaigns in the township are very different to the campaigns in the suburbs, to the northern areas, to Uitenhage or Gqeberha Dispatch now. And also very different on social media to traditional media. And we've had to try and get on top of all of that. Through that process, and we are effectively building the ship from flotsam as we sail into the storm. And we are competing against boats that have been in the race for many years, that have good ground campaigns, etc. So that is basically it. I thought I'd just share that as a backdrop. To the discussion that we'll have now. So Vuli, so
okay,
over to you.
Oh, well, it's going to be both of us in conversation. I think, Gary, that was, yeah, I think just kind of seeing what I see to be kind of rather frightening statistics, I suppose, you know, and your presentation, far be it for me to sort of say, like, I'm not a political person, but I'm not sure if I'm here as, like, when you're presenting, it's almost like a political rally, and I'm hoping that the people listening, you know, differentiate between the sort of rally and the sense of like us having a conversation about some of the key issues and the complexities around that. I mean, when you started off, I kind of, you know, your graphics were quite not frightening as such, but eye-opening. And I guess I gather many people in this room today are aware of some of these situations. I was aware of Gqeberha being the most segregated city in South Africa, even before I moved here. And I found it, many people ask me why I moved to PE, to Gqeberha, after having lived in a place like Stellenbosch. And I found myself, the answer to that was really kind of in that the challenges here are tangible. And I found your graphics was an example of that there are tangible, real things that people could do to change what is happening. So maybe just to start off, you know, we look at these things as legacy issues, and knowing that the brokenness sort of lies in how people have been laid out historically, and also the infrastructure, and I mean, water pipes and electricity and so forth, and substations blowing up every now and again. Do you have any input as to how? I mean, obviously you've mentioned the Council of Horror, I suppose, Council of Chaos, but why? How? In your opinion, why has it been allowed to stay that way? What has perpetuated this mess to a point where we're kind of hitting disaster time with water shortages and electricity and all the rest? I mean, that's a question that could put to the whole nation, but specifically here.
Yeah, so maybe sort of three answers to that. You know, one of the key drivers at the moment is drought, and that's a climate change issue. You know, so that's really out of the hands of the city. Of the metro, but the metro was designed on the basis of a water supply that was a lot more regular than what it is at the moment, you know, but we ship our water a huge distance. And so piping becomes an issue, you know, and you know, if you put a pipe in the ground 60 years, you know, 20 to 60 years later, you're going to have to bring the pipe up and replace it, you know, and you don't capitalize for that, you know, so you go to the expense of putting in the pipes, but you don't actually put money aside for coming back to it in 20, 60 years time. And the problem is that when you fix a section of a pipe, other sections then start carrying, the other weaker sections carry the pressure, and those pipes then blow. So what the municipality does, for instance, is that it moderates the pressure in the pipe. So it lowers the pressure in the pipe so that there's not so much leakage as a consequence. But you know, that means that someone sitting in New Brighton, for instance, has a trickle of water out of their taps. So they have taps in their property, but they have a trickle. Whereas in the suburbs, you know, because you have greater power base, those people have free flowing water. You know, so there is this overarching environmental issue. Then obviously, you know, apartheid set up a certain system, and the city planners at that stage went for the American model of the core city center with the suburbs, you know, and so we have a lot of land available here. And so what we've done is we've spread out our housing across, you know, and so if you go to the Chatty Valley, for instance, you'll see what we call smarty box houses laid out in rows and rows and rows and rows. But those houses are the furthest away from work and employment and city centers, and are the poorest of the people in our city. You know, so you entrenching that poverty by placing those people there. But in turn, you know, in trying to resolve that, people have insisted that they want land rather than, you know, so we have a whole bunch of abandoned buildings in the city. You could convert those to housing, which is one of our proposals. But people don't actually want to live in high-rise buildings. They want a piece of land, and the reason they want a piece of land is because they can rent out the backyard to someone else. You know, so there's a need of income. You know, so So the problem then comes back to the economics, is that the city isn't generating job and employment. One of the reasons for that is because we were spoiled by having the VWs and the General Motors and that in the city, and we never really looked beyond that. But and then the other part is that the ANC in the 26 years that they've been in government haven't really effectively changed the way that the National Party did things. So the city has very little revenue sources. For instance, the two ports that lie within the city boundaries are owned by Transnet, and decisions made in terms of what facilities exist there are made outside of the metro. Whereas in Europe and other places, the metros or the cities actually own the ports, and they can compete with other ports on certain basis. So that's not going to happen right now, but long term we would want to take control of those ports. But how would you do that? And then you have Eskom and a whole bunch of other complicated factors that kind of come to this focal point of a metro. And the political parties at the moment play this blame game. Which is useful in terms of politics, but isn't very useful in terms of understanding the problem and solving the problem. And as I said earlier, if the ANC and the DA could sit down and work out a solution together, we could then govern the city properly and then do a whole bunch of things. But that hasn't happened. And finally, just to add, part of the problem is that the administration is actually the people that do the work, not the politicians. And that, so previously it was a Broederbond run institution where, jobs were given on that basis to some extent. And now to some extent you have, in effect, you have three factions, ANC factions that have permanent people within that, and those factions compete with each other. And you, in the sort of last 10 years, you've added a component of corruption to that. So you have crooks whose interest is for the metro not to work properly because they need the chaos to be able to do the stuff that they do. So for instance, one of the things that happens is that a capital budget isn't spent in the first 8 months. They delay expenditure on that until the last 3 months, and then it's a rush. Because in that rush, you can hide a whole bunch of stuff, and so it's a lot easier because Treasury takes that money back at the end of the period, so
you're touching on something I wanted to. We had a conversation some time back where, the issue around the brokenness of the system, and you're raising politics, and we're talking about politics and we're talking about people at the same time, is that and environment and so forth. You've got like the sense of I think we use the analogy of a metaphor of a bundle of a mess of threads, and you can't necessarily pull the one out without sort of entangling yourself in something else. And I get to see that in many layers of your presentation. There's the racial issue, there's the legacy issue of apartheid, there's also the economic issue and so forth. So one of the key factors in all of these threads, maybe uniting it, is the question of values. And I think that is the question of shifting values within the city and also within the greater metro in terms of ownership, in terms of people and communities, and in everything you've been saying, there's a sense of a lack of the human element because something is missing there. And those pictures you've shown of the garbage and rubbish in the streets, having staying quite close to Walmer Township here, I you wonder that there's a pile of rubbish that is removed every now and again, but then the rubbish goes back. And this, as you say, a cycle continues. Are you, with your plan, and I've noticed those values, one has to think as an idealist, how do you think those plans would help in imparting some sort of self-worth, values or ownership of space? Because I think that's what's missing. You've been designated a space, but it's not the same in the suburbs as it would be in the township. There's an interesting case in point here where I think some of you may have come across a story of the Cabbage Bandit I think that's happening in Cape Town, where a man grew vegetables on his verge, and then, no, it's in Tshwane, sorry. And he was doing it to like provide food for, you know, impoverished people. But the system then came down on him and said he's not allowed to do that. But he wasn't going against any bylaws. And yet that sense of value and ownership and perhaps productivity, or at least initiative, could exist very well within the spaces that are being used as garbage sites here. You know, that's something I'm sort of thinking, why is this not part of our conversation? You know, the economic and human use of space, as well as also claiming it. And does your party think it's going to be able to get people to do that?
Well, I mean, the honest answer is we're not sure. We're not sure how broken we are and whether it is possible to unbreak it. You know, so, but it is our commitment. So we're made up of people that love this place, and think that we don't have an option but to try. You know, and we're going to try and do it in a way that tries not to build a binary, but rather builds a collaboration across the city. You know, and so that's one of the key things that we're trying to help people understand, is that your life in the suburb is very different to your life in the township. You know, is very different to life in the northern areas. It doesn't negate your needs, but it does mean that you have to look outside of your boundary fence. You know, and you have to understand that whilst the potholes might be very irritating to you, having rubbish piled high at the corner of every street is a far greater issue that needs to be resolved. You know, so I mean, if you take the rubbish thing.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so if you take the rubbish as an example, you know, part of the problem in the township with the rubbish issue is that they don't have trucks, service trucks, to regularly pick up the rubbish. And the reason they don't have service trucks is because they outsourced some of that at some time ago, and that whole thing collapsed. They also introduced a wheelie bin system into the townships rather than into the suburbs. And in the townships, the wheelie bins are used for other means, so like collecting firewood or collecting stones or something like that. Whereas the township residents said, give us black bags, you know. And they tried skips, but they had someone throw fetuses into the skip, and so they then stopped the skip system. You know, and it's that kind of put the skips back. You know, that's one of the key things that we're saying is create. Is if communities are going to do that, start there, and then try and moderate the behavior as you go through. Yeah, and I see there were two questions just in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to ask, Andrea's asking, how do you foster a mindset of collaboration rather than competition? And then Jackie is asking, how will AIM address complexities of race and racial constructs? Noting that non-racialism is one of your values. I think it's knowing your research, and I think these are very valid questions, the sense of competition and values and racial constructs. I mean, being in a suburb myself, I'm very much aware that I'm a Black person living in a white suburb, and my reality is very different, as you point out, to, you know, a sort of township. So, is your message to myself going to be different to a message to, you know, in the township? But again, maybe let's take those questions as you see fit.
Yeah, you know, so in two parts. So the first step on our 10-point plan is the thing called vision, and we think that the residents of the city don't think of this place as a great place to be. You know, well, there's a strong divide. You know, so we often talk about the best little metro in the world, and we get a lot of feedback on that, a lot of strong positive feedback and a lot of negative feedback. You know, so there's a national radio DJ or something that called us the armpit of the
it was Gareth Cliff. He went on and said that he is the armpit of the nation. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Strangely enough about that, I was speaking to a property developer. I'm not going to say which company it was, but he says there's a strong influx of Gauteng people moving down this way, to what I think was, you know, South Africa's best kept secret. And there's a migration, a national migration of people moving from Gauteng to here. So,
yeah, you know, so Transnet, for instance, have headquartered their national office here. And Coca-Cola, the big Coca-Cola bottler is based here. And the Coke bottler likes having its headquarters here because people have a quality of life here that they don't have elsewhere. And that's really what we're hoping to engender in the city, is the understanding that a quality of life is more important than having a mountain on your doorstep or mine dumps in your backyard. So we're trying for a mind shift change in terms of how people view this place that they live, and to see the positive side. The Bay itself is an incredible resource. The Swartkops, the Barkens, the Van der Kemps Kloof, we have something like 9 nature reserves within the municipal boundaries. We have probably some of the best beaches in the world. We have some of the best diving in the world. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to emphasize the positive of the city and show people where the opportunities lie. The fundamental problem in South Africa is that government is one of the biggest employers and sources of revenue. So if you're a business and you don't cater to government, you have less chance of succeeding. Right. If you want a career, government is a natural path to go in, and it gives government this disproportionate sort of impact in the society. Whereas if you look in other countries, business and other sectors are far greater than what government is. So people have other options and they go into other places. So that's the one thing. And then just the question on the non-racialism. The problem with the Constitution is that non-racialism isn't defined. So the DA has gone off on one tangent where it's now in effect saying that we are blind to race. They won't agree with me in terms of that thing, but that's effectively what they're saying, is that race doesn't matter to them now in terms of who they appoint and that kind of stuff. And we're saying that you can't do that. You have to. And so we've been very deliberate in terms of how we've constructed our public representatives. So for instance, in Summerstrand, we have a black candidate there. Now, it's unlikely that we'll win that ward, but we're making a statement in doing that. We're saying that a black person can represent this ward as well as a white person can, and that this thing is shifting, So we've been deliberate in our selection of candidates to look at that. But I think ultimately the thing lies in the desegregation of our city, and that's where the real problem lies, is because the roads and infrastructure that the apartheid state built to capture the race thing is very difficult to undo because of the cost of doing that. And people are comfortable in their homes; they don't want to necessarily move homes. So there's this Amizi housing projects that have been running throughout the city. So the Fairview, there's Warmer Links, and a couple of others, and they are racially integrated. But they are funded by the Metro, and as I understand it, that funding has dried up. So because of all the corruption and other stuff, the good solutions that are there have not been pursued. And so the kind of things that we're saying is the inner city housing that are gutted at the moment, and give those landlords an opportunity to change it, and if they don't possess those buildings and turn them into housing options, and if it will attract people that want to live in a multi-story apartment. But for instance, in Central, you have Zimbabwean families, the landlords, they deliberately choose immigrants because they are tenuous, and they put 3 families into a 3-bedroom flat with 1 kitchen and 1 bathroom, and they know that they have a sort of captured audience in that sense. Now the city should not be allowing that, but the city doesn't have a means to go and investigate and then to pursue those, because that same landlord who owns that building has done a good development in another part of the city. It does become very difficult in that sense. But the one thing that we're saying is that we're not going to pretend that race doesn't matter. We think that race matters. How we solve that, we're not entirely sure. We've got some ideas, and the thing is that the city already knows a lot of how to solve the problem. It's just that it's the implementation of those solutions where the wheels have come off.
I mean, I want to come back to those values. I see Christopher's got a question here, but let's say Christopher's asking, is AIM mostly made up of volunteers starting up a new party, or do you have experience from working in other parties? Should you not try to win over key, well-known, capable figures from ANC and DA who may be frustrated with factions and barriers to progression within those parties and by the racial polarization between them? It would be a good strategy, you know, sort of crossing floor crossing, you know, politics or people who are in existing parties. Is that happening within your space? Are you finding the frustrations of other members?
Yeah, so it's a kind of unspoken thing in terms of politics in South Africa, is that people that can become politicians are either people who are self-employed or unemployed. You know, so we've had a lot of residents that are credible people, but they work somewhere, you know, and when we approach them to stand as a councillor, they'll say to us, we can't stand. We can't be seen as biased by our employer, you know. So so for instance, Radio Algoa prevents, or the Herald prevents some of its people standing as councillors. Now, you know, the idea of councillor was a community representative, not a politician per se. That's the original thought behind it. And the original thought was that these people would be part-timers, not full-timers. But the level of salary that's given to the individual is such that it makes it attractive for people to want to become full-time councillors, you know, and that sets up the system where people are more interested in the council role for the benefits of the role than in terms of representing people. And you'll see the northern areas, for instance, the article in the paper today is pretty much about that. You know, it's individuals that are wanting this position because of the benefits of it, not because individuals represent the communities. And so what we've tried to be with AIM is deliberate in terms of who we bring into leadership in that. And we say that you need to show some kind of history of community involvement and some kind of history of integrity, you know, that you are a principled person and that you have tried to fix things on your own or in, you know, NGOs or other things. So I think we only have one professional politician in our ranks, one person who served on council before. The rest are not.
And are you making your party up from people from different sectors of, from all sectors of the metro?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So we are. So you know, the DA claims to be the most diverse party. They're not. And you know, if there was a way to measure it, we think that we would probably be one of the most diverse parties that there is. You know, and not just in terms of race, but gender and economic means too, you know. So and where people live, it's widespread, you know. So we have people from the suburbs, from northern areas, from the township, from Gqeberha, and we've been deliberate in that, you know. So we, you know, so the one thing about Nelson Mandela Bay is that civil society has been very strong in the city. You know, it has initiated a number of things and led the country in that sense, and that's the hope that we have wanting to restore to residents, is that you can actually do something, you know.
To come back to, you mentioned a point about, like, you know, I think this has been an enlightening sort of conversation with everybody, and some people may have not seen those photographs of the sewage or may not be aware. I think one of the greatest sins of an apartheid system in some ways, or segregatory system, is ignorance, you know, creating ignorance and maintaining ignorance. And, you know, I had a conversation with you at some point, if you're having members of your party from various constituencies and various parts of it, and being diverse that way, should your party not approach their sort of strengthening by allowing stories to be told, by making visible the invisible, making visible the stuff that people choose to not want to see, and it comes down to, you can only value what you know of your situation. Where someone is a builder and has to stand at the side of the road every day to make sure that they get their piecemeal work at someone's house and all the rest of it, and come back satisfied with a handful of rand. Whereas, I don't know, Michael so-and-so from this side is happy driving his Mercedes into his office every day, and that value system, that value reward process and value understanding. That's a complexity one needs to unlock, but I think it can be unlocked through allowing stories to be told. Stories of the Black people here, stories of foreigners living in the city, because that's another big thing. You know, it's for me of an interest that maybe your party could be the first to actually reveal the realities of Gqeberha and NMB. Andrea is also saying, you have set up a party on complexity principles, but politics generally works on simplistic binaries. How do you think complexity will work in political discourse? I think maybe what I'm saying could aid in that answer. It's like, you know, complexity in the political discourse means that certain truths are revealed and certain levels of understanding of what needs to be happening needs to be told. But your point on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look globally, you know, the sort of reductionist rhetoric has taken hold globally, you know, you know, and so we import a lot of our political understanding from America and others. You know, we do this left-right debate, which I think is unuseful, if I can use that term, because people are more complex than just a left-right binary. So there's a whole bunch of things that, you know, that make up how you believe and what you do.
Right.
And I think you're right in terms of, you know, so we don't expect on our first attempt to get anywhere close to a majority. What we're hoping is for a large enough voting bloc to impact key decisions. And to bring in the complexity of what's happening at that point. And so, you know, so I think that part of how you introduce complexity is that you help people understand the totality of the environment, you know, the holistic view. So when you talk about sewage into the Balkans, you know, for instance, you can shout at the municipality for not doing that. But part of the solution is that businesses are dumping their trash into the sewer system rather than disposing of it. That blocks the sewer system. You know, part of it is that nappies are, you know, are a consumer, you know, consumers love nappies, but they throw it down the toilet, and those nappies become concrete effectively when they dry out. You know, so the municipality isn't entirely to blame for that, you know, you know, and it's helping people understand that, and then finding the levers in that process where you can make change, you know, and you know, there's some basics, you know, so like putting skips back into the township, that's a basic, you can do that, you know, but it's not a long-term solution, but it's enough just to change the initial thing, you know. So it's this butterfly effect, you know, we're trying to find the right butterflies to give flight to across the city. And part of what we hope to do is that we access information in terms of how the city works. And so if you go to our Facebook page, for instance, what we've been doing is we've been highlighting what's happening in the city without trying to say this is the fault of the ANC or this is the fault of the DA. You know, so when the mayor crashed his car, for instance, we were very deliberate in how we responded to that, in saying that, you know, we're not going to make political gain of that, but we will more than likely now at some stage come back and say, okay, but there's a person and a position. You can't have a person in a position of mayor that there are questions hanging around, you know. So that's you know, but without attacking the person. And how do you do that? It's very difficult to do that, you know. And you know, in the sort of social media dominated world that we, you know, the 30-second soundbite, you know, rules supreme.
Yeah,
it is very difficult in that. But we're saying, you know, we really don't have a choice. We are on the brink of total collapse in the city, and if we don't get it right,
this is what I was coming to. That, you know, in terms of the butterfly effect, you can't do a massive overhaul, you know, massive takeover, but small things can happen. But my concern is how much time do we have to make those changes, really, at the end of it all, if we are in crisis. I see Liesel's asking, saying, thank you, Gary. I truly appreciate the spatial insight into these complex problems that we face in the metro. The segregated city is such a complex one to tackle, with such complex issues such as sense of place, belonging, and attachment comes to mind. That is often questionable in the segregated environment. An identity that has been socially engineered and passed down, an identity that has been socially engineered and passed down generations, ? Social justice can translate to environmental justice, but add this to the current lack of citizen will, can we revive this equation? And I think that's what we're kind of coming round and round about, the sort of the citizenship, citizen will, active citizenship. You know, when the streetlights go up, we're the first to go like, oh, the streetlights are going out, oh, there's potholes, oh, whatchamacallit. And that's not a question of everyone needs to get up and start filling in potholes, but asking as to why that is happening. Maybe that is what Liesel's sort of pointing towards. We're getting questions as to how individuals can get involved in your party. I think you've managed to convert someone in our group today. But maybe as we head towards the top of the hour, coming back to this question of, it really is in our hands, right? It's kind of like the value process is going to have to be in our hands. Do you have anything to add to maybe what Liesel was asking in terms of that citizen will?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, we're starting to understand that in terms of making a democracy work, active citizenry is key to that. You know, that you can't just put it on the back of a government, that you actually as a citizen have to do something. You know, so the basics are the verge in front of your house. You know, what does that look like? Clean that. You know, if you see a piece of paper lying in the street, pick it up. I mean, you can be angry about someone who lit it, but pick the piece of paper up. You know, and that starts. If we can get enough people doing that, we can then shift the balance. You know, so this thing about growing vegetables on your verge, I think that's a fantastic thing. You know, we should implement that as a policy. You know, until trying to, you know, cauliflowers look as pretty as, you know, whatever flowers as daisies. You know, I mean, you know, but there's a practicality to it. You know, but I know, for instance, a lot of people have tried township gardening efforts, but they all collapse. You know,
they all collapse.
You know, and why is that? We need to understand why that is, you know, because gardening,
the earth, the sand in the ground there is not, it's not nutrient rich, it's dust. And the land is very small, you know, so you do a little subsistence, you don't think of a communal sort of space. But before we get into this, because I think we could possibly get into a full 2-hour conversation around what to do here. We are at 2 minutes to 12, which is, I think, the cutoff time for our seminar. But I want to thank you, Gary, for giving time and allowing me to sort of, you know, pick your brains about certain things, and for everyone else who's taking part. Andrea, if you'd like to turn yourself back on again, and maybe we can sort of round up the seminar. But thank you to everyone who's joined us today. I've enjoyed this. I think we can have a follow-up one, because I'm very much interested in the space of the foreigner as well within this context, and we'll see how to go from there. Maybe another conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks everyone for the time.
Thank you,
Gary. Yes. Sorry to interrupt you. Carry on.
No, I was just going to say, it's registration weekend this weekend. Please make sure that you register. And on the 1st of November, make sure that you aim for the right choice, you know.
Okay, certainly. And Gary and Vulindlela, thank you very much. Very, very kind of interesting conversation that's rich in detail. And as you say, I think it warrants a follow-up. I hope we're going to have that same reaction to this seminar that we had to the seminar on race, which was, there's just not enough time. You haven't left enough time to say anything. So what we did then with the seminar on race, as some of you know, is that there is a follow-up series of dialogues on race. And it's become a very interesting extension in a way of this seminar, where there have been 6 conversations so far centered around race. And this sounds like it's also an important forum to discuss all sorts of interesting local and practical issues about complexity. So I want to thank you both very much for, again, stimulating an exciting kind of conversation, and I hope that it will continue. And yes, I think it's time to say goodbye to everybody. I'm going to put this on gallery view so we can see a few more people and sign off. We're quite nice if you put your video up, but just give us a wave. Nice to see you all. And yes, I hope this conversation will continue. All right. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.